Either way, you're going to remember my name. Hello to all my lovely changelings out there. You're watching a new episode of ElliXia's Discography Dives, a series in which I delve into the discographies of some of my favourite artists. This season we are talking about none other than one of the biggest selling British girl groups ever, the Sugababes. In the lead up to the re-release of their debut album One Touch, which comes out on the 1st of October at the time of recording. This week we have reached the band's 5th album and the first full album to fully feature Amel Baraba, 2007's Change. I of course put the ElliXia in ElliXia's Discography Dives. I'm ElliXia Q Valentine. Of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. You know that standard YouTube procedure. You know what to do. Today's look, I'm inspired by the album's colour scheme. There's a lot of yellow and purple. As you can see, they're wearing a lot of yellow. They wore that in the About You Now video as well. And then there's like a shed load of purple. And I think yellow and purple goes quite nicely together. I'm serving Cadbury Twirl, Cadbury Caramel, Cadbury Flake, you know, all the good ones. Other chocolate brands are of course available. Change was released on the 8th of October 2007 and it reached number 1 on the UK Albums Chart. It gave us the singles About You Now, Change and Denial, as well as a somewhat random promo release of My Love Is Pink as well. This was the second instance that the girls achieved the chart double of being both number 1 on the albums chart and the singles chart at the same time, with About You Now dominating the top spot in the same week. The Sugababes were the first and currently only girl group to achieve the chart double twice with 2 different albums. Spice Girls did achieve it twice with the same album but with different singles, which is arguably more impressive. But this is a record-breaking album, so let's run with it. This album was also randomly released in France as a greatest hits album, because in the UK this followed their greatest hits album Overloaded, the singles collection, which we will cover at a later date. But that wasn't released in France. Well, it got released in France, but with the addition of the Change singles. It's a bit random. I haven't got a copy of that, unfortunately. Overall, Change picks up where Taller in More Ways left off. Ultimately, it's still very, very polished, steering the group into a much more pop-focused direction. I mentioned in the previous video that the edges were starting to disappear for Taller in More Ways, but they had basically completely gone by the time we got to Change. This album, as well as the visuals that went alongside it, were very, very polished. The album photo shoots for the booklet look as if it was styled by M&S. Not exactly high fashion, but very polished. Other clothing brands are available. But this lack of edge doesn't make the album bad. There's actually plenty of stuff to enjoy on this album. As I mentioned before, this was the first album to fully feature Amel from start to finish, with music that had been both written by Amel and for Amel, specifically for her to record. So a lot was really riding on this album, because when Mutia left the Sugababes, she took a big chunk with her, and this album was a bit make or break really, because if this album had sucked or if it had tanked, it would have been curtains. Thankfully that was not the case though. The album got off to a very good start. Like I mentioned, it reached number 1. About You Now was number 1 for 4 weeks, and it became the Sugababes' biggest selling single in the UK. And the follow-up singles, whilst they may not have charted as highly, they still did well, and it had a very successful tour. I think 2007-8 was a good period for the Sugababes. As for the content of the album itself, to me I'm a bit polarised by it. Some of the songs are fantastic, some of the songs are a bit beige. And I don't think any of the songs are bad, but sometimes when a song is beige or meh, that can often be worse. I think sort of more than any other Sugababes album by this point, Change does have its fair share of filler and probably has the most that we've seen so far. But of course that is not to say that it is all filler, and it is not to say that it is a bad album. So without further ado, let's dive on into this track listing. Starting first with the album's lead single, About You Now. About You Now, like all the other lead singles by this point, is a classic. If you don't know About You Now, then where have you been? You're gonna know About You Now, trust me. You'll have heard it. You'll have heard it on the radio, or I don't know, you'll have heard it somewhere. About You Now was a colossal smash hit, reaching number 1, staying at the top of the charts for 4 weeks. It also became the 4th song ever in the UK to reach number 1, based purely on digital sales, and they were the first girl group to do this as well. This was back when reaching number 1 based on digital sales and consumption alone was a rarity. Obviously that happens all the time now, but back then, for a song to reach #1 purely on download sales alone was very impressive. And if there's anyone concerned about the future of the Sugababes before About You Now was released, I think this song shut them up. Maybe not permanently, but at least for the time being. But what about the song itself? Well, it is an absolute banger. I loved About You Now when I first heard it. I fell in love with it, and it was definitely one of my favourite songs of 2007. It's very sugary. It's got this massive rush about it, this sense of urgency, but also fun. If the song was a food, it would probably be something that is stuffed full of sugar and full of E numbers and probably isn't very good for you, but it tastes amazing, so you don't care. I think it's definitely one of those songs that everybody knows, and even if you don't like it, it's still gonna inspire a little foot tap here and there. Of course, the downside to About You Now is that it was produced by Dr. Luke, who, if you follow pop music, you'll know that he is not a very savoury character from the things he's been accused of, which we're not going to go into detail here. He's definitely the kind of producer who, when I anyway, know he's produced a song, I'm like, no, get away. Up next we have track number 2, which is one of my favourites on this album, and it's called Never Gonna Dance Again. This is one of 2 Xenomania productions on this album, which also marks the last album that the girls ever worked with them as well. It's a wonderful dance floor ballad that really nails that heartbreak disco tears on the dance floor kind of moment. It's very, very melancholy. It addresses a breakup that has left them feeling very empty and unable to feel the rhythm, unable to dance, unable to enjoy the music anymore. It's done brilliantly as well. Heidi's middle eight in particular is gorgeous. It's somewhat similar actually to Call the Shots by Girls Aloud, which came out around the same sort of time and was produced by the same team as Xenomania, so that makes sense. It's a bit like maybe a sister to Call the Shots, or a cousin possibly. And supposedly as well, Never Gonna Dance Again was actually originally written and produced for Tour It in More Ways, with Mutia as well, but it, for whatever reason, didn't make the track listing. And there's a rumoured, fabled Mutia version of Never Gonna Dance Again that people on the internet claim that they have, but it's never leaked, so we've never heard it. And of course, we do not encourage leaking here over ElliXia's Discography dives. But I would definitely be interested to hear what the song sounds like with Mutia. But Mel does a very good job of it too. Moving on to the power of 3, we have the album's 3rd track and 3rd single, Denial. Now, Denial is a banger. It's very, very good. It's got this really like chunky beat to it. It feels very satisfying. Not to use a food metaphor again, but I feel like Denial is like, I don't know, this massive burger that you take a big bite into it and you're like, oh god, yes, that is just right. Lyrically, it addresses somebody who the girls didn't want to fall in love with, but they couldn't help it, and they were basically denying themselves and that they didn't feel anything for this person. But this person broke their barriers down. I especially like Amel's lyric, "You are like a power of nature, telepathic, beautiful creature." And also written by Vivi Brown, who is a fantastic singer, and if you're not familiar with Vivi Brown, then you should definitely check her out. And I have to talk about the video as well. The video is amazing. I was obsessed with this video when it was new. There's not really a plot to it, but it basically just features them wearing a gazillion different costume changes and doing some sort of like fashion photo shoot. It is like this massive fashion box come to life, and there's so many looks in the video. Like, they'll wear one look and then it's not seen again for the rest of the video. There's that many. And it's very extravagant, it's very flamboyant, quite camp as well. It was directed by Harvey B. Brown, who also directed the Can't Speak French video for Girls Aloud at the same time as well, which is also very flamboyant as well, so that must have been his style. Niall video for me is an absolute home run, I love it. Track number 4, we have My Love Is Pink, the album's second Xenomania collaboration. My Love Is Pink is very fun, it's very up-tempo, it's got a bit of an attitude, it's very youthful actually as well. I really like My Love Is Pink. It is a bit silly, but it's fun, and it is also very camp as well. The problem with My Love Is Pink though is it doesn't quite suit the Sugababes. Listening to it, I feel like it would be a great song for Girls Aloud. It would have been a great song for the Saturdays, who granted hadn't launched yet, but I could definitely see the Saturdays doing it. I could even see Mini Viva doing it as well. although I know this also predates them by a couple of years, but it's very much got that fun, tongue-in-cheek vibe, and it doesn't quite suit the babes. And I feel like this was backed up because I remember somebody on Twitter asked Keisha about the song, and I think her reply was, "Oh my god, the worst song, haha." So I don't think Keisha likes this one very much either. I don't know if that's still the case because this was a few years ago. Yeah, it's still a fun song, and it randomly received like a digital single release in December 2007, just a one-track single with no B-side, no music video. So like, I'm not really sure what the point of that was, but it was there. Changing it up to track number 5, we have the titular track, Change. See what I did there? And this was also the album's second single as well. It received the tried and tested method of releasing the album's second single, a ballad, in time for the festive season. Like Denial, Change feels very chunky as well. It's a very good ballad, I think. It deals with mourning somebody, though the lyrics don't explicitly mention death. It's very much implied by the lyrics. But I think it can be related to and applied to sort of any situation where someone's lost somebody, whether that is through death or, you know, a breakup. And I think it deals with it really well. It deals with the sadness and the struggling to adapt to this new change in your life that you were never expecting. And whilst it isn't quite on the level of some of the other sugar ballads we've had, like Too Lost and You and Stronger, Change still stands on its own really well. And vocally, they sound great. The video for Change is also really, really good as well. It shows the girls as the 4 seasons. Keisha is spring, Heidi's autumn, and then Amel has both summer and winter, and they look amazing. The false lashes really come out in full force in this music video. Keisha's got big petals as hers, and then like Heidi's got really long, like autumnal, I don't really know, leaves maybe, whatever they are. The interesting thing about the song Change as well though, is that the sort of melody that is on the backing track is actually taken from a royalty-free song that I believe was used on like, for some sort of Apple product back in the day. I'm not entirely sure which one it was, but I want to say for like some sort of clock on an iPod or something. It was royalty-free music that Apple had anyway, and and Change samples that. And it's kind of funny that that's how they built a song off some royalty-free music. But I didn't know at the time that that's what that was, so it works. Track 6, we have Back When, diving into the album's second half or third quarter. After a strong start, we are kind of in sort of middling territory. Back When addresses a relationship which is effectively running its course. It used to be really, really good. They used to do all these lovely things together, but now it's just dried up, basically. It's got a kind of folksy, acoustic-y element to it. It's one of those songs I think that's kind of, it's all right. I don't mind it. I do think vocally they sound fantastic. There's some lovely, lovely, lovely harmonies on the chorus as well. It's just not really a highlight, I would say. And that leads us on to track number 7, Surprise, in brackets, Goodbye. And this one is kind of like, again, it's kind of just okay. It plods along a little bit. It doesn't really feel like it gets going anywhere. It addresses a breakup where the ex is expecting them to be still really hung up on him, only to find that they've actually moved on really, really quickly. It kind of just leaves me feeling a bit meh, this song does, unfortunately. Moving on to track number 8, we have Back Down. Not to be confused with 2 tracks ago when we were talking about Back When. This is Back Down. They are very different songs. Back Down's a bit of an experiment, and I appreciate that, because the last couple of songs have been fairly safe. Back Down has a bit of a reggae flavour to it. It's quite repetitive, but I really like it. Each girl has their own verse, and they each talk about what they like in a man, what traits they like in a man. And I enjoy Back Down. It's a little bit different for them. When they did it on the tour as well, in particular, it really worked. On the studio version, maybe it doesn't work as well, but in a live setting, it works brilliantly. It's one of those songs that is quite minimal, but doesn't really need to be anything more than that. I think it works really well as it is. I don't think it's a particularly popular song with the fan base. And I can kind of see why some people might not like it, but I really enjoy it. Track number 9, we have Mended by You. Now, this is possibly one of my least favourite songs on this album, I think. It's a toss-up between this one and Surprise. Mended by You is nice, don't get me wrong. Like, it is a very sweet ballad. It's very elegant, dignified, peaceful, etc. I just find it a bit, you know? Lyrically, they're singing about how a previous relationship had left them feeling broken and how this new person has then come up, quote, like something from a movie scene, and has rescued them, basically. The song has a good opportunity for some fantastic harmonies and really lovely vocals and like really beautiful moments. But they don't do that. I mean, like they sound fine in it, of course, but there's not really any harmonies in the chorus. With the previous records, what the Sugababes were able to do was take a rather basic sounding song and elevate it with their vocals. And on Mended by You, it just doesn't quite work, unfortunately. I also want to know what Amel is singing about in her verse when she sings August 23rd, do you remember? Remember what, Amel? What happened on August 23rd? Amel, if you're watching this, let me know. Yeah, Mended by You, unfortunately, for me, just leaves a fair bit to be desired. Thankfully, though, we have track number 10, which is 3 Spoons of Sugar, and I absolutely adore this one. 3 Spoons of Sugar is a bop. I think sonically it's a little bit like a sister to Red Dress from the previous album. It's got a bit of a strutting element to it, you know, it's a bit funky, it's a little bit sassy as well. It's a very wink wink, nudge nudge, a little bit cheeky, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing as well. We're talking about a guy and a girl in 2 separate verses who are really sexy, really stylish. They've got it. No one compares to them. And they sing about how basically everybody loses their shit when they see them because they're so amazing. I mean, one of the lyrics is, I'm gonna need a whole lot of therapy to get over you. It's like, wow, okay. How gorgeous is this guy? What's his name? What's his at? Tell me. And 3 Spoons of Sugar was also featured in the soundtrack to the film St. Trinian's, which was also released that year. And 3 Spoons of Sugar I had on repeat a lot. Now the problem with 3 Spoons of Sugar though, because you know, we can't have anything nice, can we? The problem with 3 Spoons of Sugar is not the song itself, but the fact that it's actually only a UK bonus track. So my version of Change has 3 Spoons of Sugar, but like the other international versions don't have it. The version that we have on Spotify in the UK doesn't have 3 Spoons of Sugar on it. So it goes straight from Mended by You into the next track. And, you know, this second half of Change isn't the greatest. But a song like 3 Spoons of Sugar does add a much needed change of pace and variety. To not have it on the album is a mistake. I think it should be, I mean, it should have been on the album from the start, but it's not on Spotify. Even though we're in the UK, we still haven't got it. Island Records, if you're watching this, A, don't copyright strike me, but B, please put 3 Spoons of Sugar on Spotify because we need it. Did actually tweet Island Records the other day to ask them to do it, but I didn't get a response, so. Maybe I shall put on my Can I Speak to the Manager wig and try again. Now that moves us on to track number 11, which is Open the Door. This one is a nice mid-tempo, somewhat R&B sounding song, which is actually a welcome change as well, because this is the first time really on this album that we've even dipped our toes into R&B. And I really like Open the Door. There's some lovely vocals, there's some oohs at the start of it, which almost sound a bit muttier-ish actually. Keisha really shines on this song as well. I think it addresses a relationship that is on the brink, but they don't want it to end. And they're saying, open the door, please, let's talk about this. Let's fix this because we have a really good thing going. Let's not ruin it. I particularly like Keisha's middle 8 where she sings, I could say I hate you now, but you'd see through me easily. I think that's really good. Closing off the album, we have Undignified, track number 12. And I actually really like Undignified as well. It's a nice way to close the album. It very much has that sort of end credits feel to it, I think. Or like final scene. The final scene from a film. It's got that kind of element to it. Lyrically, I think it's fantastic. It addresses a relationship in which the power dynamic is completely off The guy they're singing about has complete power over them and abuses that power, and they don't want him to see the weakness, but they can't help it. And they'll believe any lie he says. It's very toxic and dangerous, but I think they sing it really well, and I think it's done wonderfully. It is kind of like a Keisha solo track, and Mel and Heidi aren't really featured in the song as much, but Keisha has such a great voice that I welcome Keisha solo tracks. And that brings us to the end of the main album. We have 2 B-sides, which is Era, so not anywhere near as many as we've previously had. First B-side is In Recline, which was the B-side to About You Now. And I personally really, really like In Recline, and I absolutely think it should have been an album track. It's got a bit of a retro flavour to it. It's very catchy. I think it's great. I would have easily, quite happily swapped out Surprise or Mended by You for this one. But at least this one's on Spotify, so there is that. It is one of those ones where it's kind of like a Keisha solo track, but I think it works really well. It's got a bit of sass, it's a bit funky as well. I definitely think it's a hidden gem, and I would absolutely recommend putting it on this album. Let's all go back in time to 2007 and change the track listing. I'm just kidding, it's not that deep. Last track we have is a song called I Can't Take It No More. This was a B-side to the single of Change. And actually, this is the last B-side, to date at least, of the Sugababes that is an original track and not a cover. I Can't Take It No More is kind of, it's just there. It feels unfinished. I never feel inclined to listen to it, really. It is sort of just, it's there. It's fine as a B-side though, because, B-sides don't always have to be amazing. Sometimes B-sides, ultimately they are the leftovers, aren't they? So I think it's okay as a B-side. I did see a somewhat shady comment about the song Can't Take It No More, saying it was quite bland and very middle of the road, and therefore would fit in on this album quite well. And I'm like, well, I'm not saying I don't agree, but I'm not saying I agree either. And that wraps up Change, an album which I think is half great and then half kind of meh. I don't think any song on this album is bad. I can say that. I don't think any of the songs are bad, but there are a few weak tracks. Ultimately, when you've got bad songs, they are at least interesting. Like, you remember in the last video I talked about favourite song, which I think is awful, and I still think is awful. But I had a lot to say about it because it at least elicited a reaction to me where I was like, oh my god, what the fuck is this? But it's hard to talk about some of these songs because it's something like, what can I really say? And I kind of understand it as well, because I mentioned obviously that this was the first proper Amel album, and the stakes were high because a lot of people were thinking, can they pull this off? Can they continue without Mutya, who was such a integral core member before this? And so I kind of understand if the Sugababes or the label wanted to maybe play it a bit safe with song choices because they didn't want it to flop. Because of course, if the album had flopped, that probably would have been the end. Because they already had a few strikes against them now with the lineup changes. And the British media are unforgiving, and they are especially unforgiving to women as well. And they were especially unforgiving back then because Sugababes and Girls Aloud were both dogged by so many rumours of splits and clashes and fallouts. I think, they were just waiting for the Sugababes fall from grace, but they had to wait a couple more years before we got to that. And Change did do the business chart-wise. Like I said, it was #1, it was a big success. The tour was a big success as well. I actually went to the tour as well. Went to it, I was 16, we went to see it at Wolverhampton Civic Hall with my mother and her friend, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And Change is an album that I really loved at the time. I listened to it loads when it was new. I think I even said it was my album of the year in 2007 back then. But over time, that new album sheen and gloss does fade. And I can look at it now and think, well, objectively, it isn't that great an album. But it isn't bad either. And I do enjoy a lot of the songs on it as well. And I think the era was good, visually, the music videos were fantastic, the performances were fantastic as well. So I don't want you to go away from this video thinking that I hate it, because I don't. I do like it. Prior to this, the Sugababes has set the bar very, very high. So the higher you set the bar, the harder it is to achieve it, I guess. And more or less, as soon as the Change era concluded, They actually got to work on their 6th album very quickly, which of course we're going to review next week. So, thank you very much for joining me. What is this? I don't know. I have been ElliXia Q Valentine, and you've been watching another episode of ElliXia's Discography Dives. Don't forget to tune in next time when we will be discussing 2008's Catfights and Spotlights, and actually the last album to feature Keisha. Very much a calm before the storm kind of record and era, but of course we will get into that. And thank you once again. I've been ElliXia Q Valentine, and of course, as always, like you need reminding at this point, but please book me. Mwah.